So first of all, I want to welcome everybody to our cost risk schedule webinar. We're really excited to show you some of the features that have already existed in Join and then some of the enhancements that have been added to those features. All right, let's head into the meat of the presentation here. Okay, so we're going to just review a little bit of the agenda first. So we're going to start with some introductions, and then we're going to go into a little bit of background for each of us here, give us a little bit of, give you guys a little bit of our story, and then we're going to head into some audience polls, get you guys involved, see where some of the pain points may lie for you guys in pre-construction and design. And then after that, we are going to head into our live demo. After the demo, we're going to have about 15 minutes or so to answer any questions that you guys may have. So the way that it works for you guys, there's no live chat feature, but rather there is a Q&A feature where you could send in your questions. We have some joint folks in the background who are able to answer maybe some of the simpler or easier questions right then and there. And then we're going to save some of the maybe more detailed and more complex questions for that Q&A session at the end. If we don't get to a question of yours, if we ran out of time or whatever it might be, we will definitely get back to you after the webinar. And then also keep your eyes and ears peeled for a recording of the webinar, which should come to you guys after. All right. So let's start with some introductions. I'll begin here since I'm talking already, but my name is Vin Caruso, as you guys can see. I'm a product marketing manager here at Join. I have been at Join for over 3 years now. But before that, I was in industry for about 6 years. I began my career at Clark Construction in the Washington, D.C. area on a project manager type track, so a little bit more operations heavy. And then I moved over to Bizzuto Construction, where I was doing Precon and estimating more specifically. So very familiar with all the joys and the pain points of pre-construction and excited to show you what we have here today. I am going to pass it over to Garrett.
Howdy, Vin. Thank you. So, for those of y'all who don't know me, I'm Garrett, one of our industry specialists. Been here for a little over 4 years. Prior to that, was estimating with Leighton and got a fun, rich history of a variety of construction in the background. Good time, good family business. I see a ton of my buddies here on the call, so excited to get into the triangle with you guys. With that, though, let's save a little time. I'll toss it over to Patrick.
Thanks, Garrett. I'm Patrick Whaley. I'm an estimating and pre-construction manager at Boldt Construction. Have been in the industry for almost 18 years now and have spent the last 8 at Boldt working on a number of projects in and around the United States and have been working with Join for about the last 5 years now. So excited to be here.
Very nice. Yeah, thank you, Garrett. Thank you, Patrick. Obviously, great to have one of our customers on the webinar with us. Definitely a little special touch there. All right, so let's head into the audience poll section of this. So I am going to initiate a poll here. Please participate, guys. We want to get you guys involved. We don't want you just sitting there watching. So let me initiate this first one. So the first one that we're going to do is what causes delays in precon and design? So in your experience, what causes the most delays in precon and design? There's sluggish decision-making, design revisions, budget misalignment, market volatility, incomplete risk visibility early on. So let us know what you guys are thinking.
Oh, that's pretty quick participation coming right back in terms of feedback.
Yeah.
Well, we're giving this just a minute. Patrick, I gotta ask, how many projects have you been on inside of Join? Do you remember?
84, I think. And then within Boldt, we have 190 plus projects currently.
That's a pretty fun portfolio.
It is. It is. And it spans the gamut, from a $300,000 remodel to a $3 billion hospital. So
from 3 to 3, it's just a matter of digits. I can dig it.
It's pretty funny here, Garrett. You and I when we were talking about this, I was like, I think sluggish decision making is going to win out. And I think you said budget misalignment. And Looks pretty close here, but I think you may have me beat by a little bit.
I'm doing a lot better on here than on my fantasy brackets, so I'll take it.
All right, let's give it another 10 or 20 seconds here. See a few more trickling in.
We were also talking, I mean, like all kind of good questions, there should be a select all of the above, but then we figured it'd be 100% on the select all of the above, and we wouldn't get any diversity.
Yep.
Yep.
I wish I had a vote so I could just send mine a little bit over the top. Looks like we're tied.
Oh man. Well, we
All right.
definitely have a consensus on direction there. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep. All right. So definitely looks like it's either budget misalignment or sluggish decision making. And oh, wow. All right. So budget misalignment wins out. So you know what? Let's Garrett, I'm gonna send it over to you to expand on that then.
Oh man, I feel like every project that I've been working with in the last 4 years, it, it's a similar narrative where often budget's not early communicated. It's more of, hey, we want to save money, or it costs too much. Make it cost less. So you go through an exercise of reducing cost to a degree, and then the answer is, well, make it cost less. And you go through that iteration for a little bit, and later on in the project, you get a little bit more clarity around kind of the overall budget and goal. Where ideally early on, you might ask for that to give a little bit better direction or a little bit more savings opportunity early on in the project. Patrick, would you agree with that, or is that something that you're seeing?
No, I would agree with that, Garrett. I mean, to me, they go hand in hand. The sluggish decision making will directly impact, your budgeting. If you have an owner that is, or an architect or whoever that's helping to make these decisions, that isn't making those decisions quickly, it definitely drives, issues, and it drives the headaches that you see in these types of projects. And I think what it really comes down to is that you just have to be able to communicate, to your owner, to your designer, to your trade partners, subcontractors, whoever, how important these decisions are.
Yes,
Definitely.
definitely agreed there. I'm gonna end this poll. I think I don't know if you guys were able to see it before this, but those are the official results. Garrett and Patrick, thanks for the kind of giving us a little bit of feedback there on that. I definitely agree. I thought sluggish decision making just because I feel like a lot of times you can't make a fully informed decision when you don't have all the pieces, which is kind of part of what we're talking about today with having the cost, risk, and schedule taken into consideration. So let's actually, in the interest of time, let's launch this other poll too. And this one. All right, second poll here. What slows the decision making in Precon? So what do you think slows the decision making process the most in Precon and design? No one knows the urgency, waiting on verified pricing from subs, owner approval slow or unclear, design feedback on the scope takes a little bit too long, incomplete drawings, or too many cooks in the kitchen, too many stakeholders are involved. All right, I'm going to give you guys like another minute to fill this out.
While they are, I'm going to poke you, Patrick. What are you thinking?
For this one.
Yeah.
Um, you know, it de it really depends. Like I've seen, I've had it be any of these, right? So that's kind of the funny part. But I would say a lot of what I've seen in the past, 3 years has been you've got too many people involved in the selection of certain things. And so it just starts to really bog you down. And until you can get that team streamlined and, really saying, okay, we need to make these decisions. We need to get these items done. Um, you know, things tend to bog down and they tend to slow down from my experience.
Yep. And I think, that just like further kind of hits home the fact that you need to get everybody in the same room at the same time, looking at the same decision. Because I mean, the fact that there are so many stakeholders on these projects, especially in certain industry sectors too, it's like the least you could actually do is at least centralize in that location so everybody's singing off the same sheet of music.
Yeah. And the other thing that we always need to remember too is that when we're presenting estimates, we have to present them differently to different people, right? Because a owner is going to look at that estimate different than a design team member is going to look at that estimate. Then, in some instances, you may be having to sit down and talk to the owner's, financing partner.
Yep.
So how we describe all of these things and how we present that information, is crucial in that.
Yep. All right, so I just shared out the results. I think everybody should be able to see that now. The reason why we were talking about that stakeholder piece too is that it seems like too many stakeholders won out for this one. And then right below that, or right behind, was owner approval being slow or unclear, and then behind that, incomplete drawings or scope gaps. All right. Any final comments here, Garrett or Patrick, before we move along? Glad that we
I
got
think
some.
these,
Go ahead.
yeah, I was just going to say, I think these will come into play with some of what we're talking about today.
Exactly.
Help mitigate some of it. Granted, there's no one easy answer, so it'll be process, it'll be communication. We'll pull Patrick into some storytelling a little bit of what those iterations look like and some of the changes that we've been seeing there as well.
Yeah.
Yep. Perfect. All right. So let's move right along to the meat of the presentation here. One of the anecdotes that we really love talking about here is that 100K a day problem. So one of our beloved customers, JD King, who may actually even be on this call, initially told us about this. So he described for a $30 million project that is 18 months long, every day of delay in pre-construction means you are pushing off $100,000 worth of profits to the next quarter or the next fiscal year, $100,000 a day. That's how much a delay in a decision can actually cost you. So let me put that into writing a little bit more so that we could really internalize what we're dealing with there. So like I said, $30 million job, 18 months, that's $100,000 per day. That's already a lot, but 300 million, as you could see there. I mean, and a lot of our customers that are on the call right now, you guys have $300 million jobs. It's not like they're not anomalies anymore. That's $1 million per day that you are leaving on the table. That profit is left to take advantage of later on, just from a delay in pre-construction, just from not being able to understand or see, or for the team to understand, hey, if we don't decide on this by the time that we are supposed to, that means that GMP is going to be pushed by a day or a week or a month, and that means $1 million, $2 million, $100 million, whatever it might mean. Every late decision is delayed profit. Every day has a price tag.
Just want to call out JD is here. Thank you, JD. You the man.
Yes. And how do we solve that? How do we decrease the chance of delays and expedite those profits? It's all about connecting that cost, risk, and schedule, which is exactly what Join is helping our customers to do, and is doing even more of with the enhancements that we're going to show you. Because if you have the cost, risk, and schedule all presented, all of the implications are there for you to take a look at, for the project team to take a look at. You make a fully informed decision that sticks. You make the right decisions at the right time for the right reasons, and then you get to GMP more quickly. And that's where the profit center is. That's where you're actually able to start making the money, and you don't have to push that $100,000 or that $1 million to the next quarter or the next year. Okay. Any comments here before we move on?
I don't think so.
No.
All right, so without further ado, then let's head into the product. That's what everybody came here to see. With that being said, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and Garrett, I'm going to pass it back over to you there. And let me just give a little background here. So what you guys are seeing here is the dashboard, but the first vertex of that triangle that we're going to touch on is our timeline feature, right? So timeline has been around for over 2 years now. This is something that our customers have been able to take advantage of to give their project teams a view into big picture deadlines and due dates on their projects. So I know when I was in pre-construction, the schedule, I would sometimes share that with I would share it with my owner maybe every time I submitted an estimate, but it wasn't something that was readily available to the team. With our timeline functionality, everybody's in the know of those big picture deadlines and due dates. And dates like a GMP, nobody should be in the dark about when the GMP is being established. And with some of the enhancements that we have here today, like the importing of a schedule from P6 or Microsoft Project, that is literally or was literally our number one most requested feature from our customers. So we're super excited to show you guys that today and to show you the benefits that brings to timeline usage.
With that, let me go ahead and pick it up, Vin, and we'll kind of walk through the process and talk with, at least I talk with my hands inside of the application all the time. So when you navigate to timeline right now, what we're looking at is that presentation mode. When we toggle in the upper left-hand corner into that editing mode, that's where we have the ability to bring in that schedule and import. Now, let me go ahead and grab a file and we'll upload kind of as we're talking through. In the background, we have 4 different milestones already existing inside of this project. If we had existing events and phases, those are going to continue without change. Now, for this particular, there's the ability upon re-import where you can maintain the deletion of activities if you've paired them out, or you can bring them in new. So as of right now, I want to bring in all of the activities from this file, but sometimes it pays to kind of redact some of that information until it's solidified. So if I kind of cruise through here, let me start with collapsing everything. I don't really want to present my construction schedule yet. I do want to represent the construction phase that we have over here on the right-hand side, but the individual events, they're not quite ready for consumption. So it's pretty easy to select these and then pair them out. And then at the next import, if I want to keep those paired out, that's what that checkbox is for. So when you go to update dates with that next iteration, either from P6 or Project or any of those other scheduling softwares that you utilize, and you can just have that checkbox marked and it will hold and retain what you have deleted or paired out prior to. Now,
And Garrett, I've used that with importing schedules, to kind of clean up past events too. Where I just want us to focus on what's in front of us and not necessarily worry about what we've already done.
I mean, it goes right back to what you were saying in terms of presenting estimates. You have to keep in mind the personas that you're presenting to and ultimately the narrative that you guys are trying to communicate. And that tool helps whether you're focusing in more on today or trying to span a gambit of a much longer project, multiple years, etc. Now, with this, let's pivot back. So this is kind of the back of house editing. There's a few features where you can right click, hide through, but when we go back into that enabled mode, we can really dial into kind of that process and that communication. Now, each of these events or phases, you can link items to. The example that I have kind of set up here is our OAC meetings, where we can go through and either proactively or retroactively tag the items that we're going to discuss. This really helps in filtering down when you're walking into a meeting, hey, we need to focus on these 4 or 5 decisions, or these are what we talked about previously. So depending on whether you're forward looking or backward looking, very helpful to be able to add those related items. I'm just going to grab one here as an example. As soon as it's tagged, we'll see that link over on the left-hand side. We can always pop it open, or we can go and hop into the items list with that same filter. We'll kind of look at that view a little bit later on. Now, let me go ahead and X out here. When we link an item to event, this just helps solidify that first 2 points of schedule and cost and that relation and kind of playing back and forth. Now, OSU meeting, great representation. Patrick, I'm going to kind of poke you here for that last responsible moment or minute, depending on
Yep.
verbiage and vernacular, and how you're currently utilizing that.
Right. So right now we're implementing this triangle strategy onto some large projects that we have going on. And, what we're really trying to make sure is that, when you look at what you have on the screen, Garrett, and you see those red items that are past due, like Vin talked about, each day that those go on, you could be talking hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars, depending on the size of the project. So, by really focusing in and tying these items, one to our schedule, two to our risk log, and then just using the overall tool to present it, we're able to really tie it and show it to the owner and say, hey, if we don't get a decision made, on signing off on a steel vendor, as an example, it's going to cost us $100,000 a day at a minimum, for every day that we don't make that decision. Now, I don't know too many owners that are going to, spend $100,000 frivolously. But when you start to put that in front of them, it helps to drive that decision. And, really you can say, yeah, we can let it go 3 days, but it's going to cost us, the 300,000 plus say another $500,000 to buy our way back to the front of the line and jump over everybody. So you have to make owners aware. You have to make, design teams aware too, of just, hey, we need a decision. We need you to select that floor sample, or whatever it is. It's just visuals help everybody. And that's what makes Join such a powerful tool in these instances, is that, we all get the Bueller sometimes where it's just noise in the background. But really, when you're seeing a visual, it's what's going to help us to, make that change happen sooner. It's going to get those past due events wrapped up quicker, because, owners don't like red on things.
I
Definitely.
completely agree there. I might hop in for a second, because I really do think that visual nature of the timeline is really important here. I know when I was in pre-construction, there was never something like as blatant staring us in the face, showing, hey, look at all those little red histograms. That's all past due decisions, right? That's all money lost or profit delayed. The visuals in Join's timeline really do kind of hit home on like what needs to be addressed right now, versus what can wait. And I think that's a real differentiator in terms of, just general timeline and schedule. And then beyond that too, it's obviously, sometimes it comes down to an individual decision, right? Like you're describing there, Patrick, with like releasing the steel or the kind of mill order concept, but kind of even bigger picture too, like having a group of design decisions that need to be made in order to continue on to that next milestone. Like you guys have something templatized in Join that says, hey, we need to make these 20 decisions in the conceptual set or the schematic set in order to even move on to the DD set or something like that. Like finishing the design decisions that need to be decided before being able to move on to that next set. Otherwise, it's not really design development if we don't have, like the MEP systems designed or coordinated or whatever it might be. Right. So I think that's just like an important thing to point out too. And then my last thing, I swear, on this anyway, is that just getting that timeline imported into Join now through, P6, OPC, Microsoft Project, Planera, Phoenix, anything that's a .xer, .xml file, it can getting that jump started is half the battle too, right? So we know that you guys already have a master schedule sitting somewhere. So why duplicate the work? Well, there is no more duplicate work. You could bring that in and then take out what you guys want. So Patrick, you said take out the things that have already happened. Garrett, you showed us, hey, we don't need construction activities in here. We don't need to show the windows are being installed and, January 10th, 2028 or something like that. That we don't need that right now. Let's show it's applicable in pre-construction and design.
I do just want to toss one thing out there on top of it as you're looking through. Sometimes you don't have to take it out. You can also filter down whether you want to talk by events, you want to talk
Mhm.
by specific tasks, and then you can also filter by date. So if you're looking at a specific individual view, you can do that. You can also print it, bring it out as needed. We know this is the kind of the workflow of handing something over on the desk is often mandated or kind of the start of the conversation there as well. But I also just wanted to toss out, in case you weren't catching what Vin was talking about, there's some nomenclature I've heard more and more often in the last year and a half. The gates for progression in between those design phases. Um, just want to hit all of those, buzzwords to kind of get the ears tingling. If there are particular decisions that will prohibit you from passing through the gate from your DDs onto your next steps or SDs into your DDs, you can create that event, tag the items, and then have that communication just very visual front and center here.
So before we move on to this, Garrett, I don't know if you have anything else to show in terms of clicks, but I'm definitely curious from Patrick's perspective what this looked like. So I know that you've uploaded your schedules before, Patrick. What did
Yep.
that process look like getting the schedule? Like, were there hurdles in getting that? Like maybe who were you speaking to? What was that process like in case it's not like something that a pre-con manager might have readily available at all times?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I had to do is I just had to work with our superintendents to get the schedules. Um, and there's always kind of that hesitancy on the part of schedulers or superintendents or whoever is managing your schedule sometimes to turn it over because they don't want to necessarily, show their entire hand. I think a lot of us know what we're talking about when we say that, whether it's a weather delay or something else that we have built into the schedule to protect it. But once, we've shown this to our superintendents, it becomes, and they start to understand it and they understand how we're going to drive decisions through the process, both in pre-construction and now starting to push this into construction. They like it and it's super useful to them so that, they're always like, oh, hey, we have a new schedule update. Can we push it in there now? So it becomes that tool that they get to leverage. And the simplicity, like Garrett showed, of just dragging that file in there and dropping it, and snap of a finger, it's uploaded and you're ready to run, is powerful. There's not the sitting there waiting for it to upload. It's uploaded. It's not like you're having to go in and build out a schedule in this, and in this it's there for you. So I mean that is the crucial aspect of this, that I think when people start to understand the simplicity of it, that's where it makes it very powerful.
I love it.
All right. So, Patrick, really appreciate that. I think it's probably a good time to move on to, another vertex of this triangle to keep the trifecta and triangle metaphor going here. So let's talk a little bit about risk, right? So risk register, it's been around for almost a year now. And this is really just meant to kind of be a little bit more collaborative with the risks that are on your projects. Similar to how you deal with items or decisions collaboratively within Join, risks should be handled similarly. I know for me in pre-construction, I don't remember having a risk register. I could tell you that much. Never mind having a collaborative space where you could kind of share and view the risks. But they should be kind of handled similarly in terms of understanding what's the most important risk to address right now, and then what are the implications of that risk. And then, as I'm sure you guys can guess, we're going to get to the fact that these risks connect to schedule, they connect to items, they don't live in a vacuum, they're all interconnected, and we need to interconnect them in order to properly address them. But before we do that, Garrett, I'm curious what you think your definition is, before you go into the product, what you think your definition is of what is a risk versus an item. What's the difference? What's the nuance between the two? And then I'd love for you to show us how you can kind of parse these down and get into the nitty gritty of the risk register.
Oh man, you're like trying to ask me to catch lightning in a bottle. What is
Yeah,
risk?
right.
On a project, it could be everything. It's anything that has that kind of potential impact, uh, to negatively affect the project. Something that's identified as, hey, it could be a cost risk, schedule risk, safety risk. It might be a constructability risk. It might be well, I think I already said contract, but I mean, it's like ice cream flavors. When you're Baskin Robbins, they're 31, but if you go home, like you can make any ice cream you want now in a Ninja Creamy. So the sky's the limit in terms of what risk could mean in your individual project, but I'd kind of boil it down to anything that's going to negatively impact it or has the negative impact potential on your project.
Yeah. So Garrett, one thing that we were playing with kind of in a training yesterday in the estimating precon group was, weather, right? That's always a huge risk on our projects. And somebody said, well, so can we put a 100-year flood event in here and track that? I mean, because that truly is a risk. It's something that has the potential to happen. It may not happen, but it's a risk that depending on where you're building in the country, it may be the 100-year hurricane. It may be, the earthquake, the tornado, a flash flood. And what does that risk pose to you?
One that I never thought I'd see was that ice storm in Texas. Was it 2, 3 years ago? And it's that 100-year event that put down everything everywhere, and definitely more and more popping up there. That's a great example.
Yeah.
Now, let's see here. I want to call out just a couple of the updates for those who are just seeing this now, and then we kind of talk through a little bit more of flow and whatnot. Now, this visual up at the top, that one's been there in terms of that upper chart right-hand side, and it really helps communicate those riskiest risks inside of your project. I want to say really hard word, the riskiest risk that ever did live in the project, upper right-hand corner. They get a little bit more mild and temperate as you move down and to the left. You're looking at your likelihood on the vertical axis, your impact on that horizontal axis. Now, this kind of gives you that heat map of, okay, we have a lot in that upper right. We can start working to the lower left. But just to the left of that, these two kind of pie charts help you understand the two different segmentations. So we have our overall risk score or risk level identified with the wonderful three colors of, hey, this is high risk. This is going to be our medium risk. This is going to be our low risk. A single click will help you filter down and kind of focus on those. Low risk, not too pressing yet, but if we filter down by that high risk, definitely kind of the start of the conversation. Now, on top of that, we can also talk about open and closed risks. So once we've identified the risk, then starts all of the effort in the background. Okay, can we mitigate it? Can we engineer it out? Can we work through the process and come up with a plan to ideally completely dodge the freight train that's potentially coming with that identified risk? I mean, if we could figure out how to control the weather, Patrick, I'm going to toss that one over to you in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
Sometimes we can close it. Sometimes we're just identifying it and we're waiting. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. And the example that we were using was that, this was in a theoretical project in Texas. And so they were, thinking back to all of the damage that they had. I think it was last year with the flood, with those flash floods, and so what they did was they put it in and then they actually built an item that is sitting there just kind of saying, okay, here's the three possible, scenarios, right? It's a low flood, it's a severe flood, or it's that 100-year event. And what is the cost associated with that? What's their schedule impact? And then within the risk, what is the mitigation plan that we do? Now, I will say that, they had a little tongue-in-cheek humor in there that was called the insurance agent, but that is kind of the generic starting point for some of this. And really it's, but it starts to make you think about things that, we don't necessarily always think about. We always build in weather delays. We build in, safety nets and contingencies and buffer time because it's construction. It's a risky environment. But if we can identify these as they come up or even before they come up, and work proactively ahead of time to save ourselves, time and the stress of this, it pays off in dividends for us.
I'm going to kind of step on your shoulders right there, Patrick, because it's been built into the estimate, the schedule, your contingency, but usually that's kind of back of the mind. Bringing it forward helps with that communication. it lets folks know like, hey, we are planning on it. And this is kind of our process when we're talking weather. Uh, you're victim to circumstance. Now, when it
Yep.
comes to other risks, you can kind of prove that plan in place. Um,
Right.
Actually, let me navigate here just for a second because I want to kind of talk through what that planning or conversation can look like. In this particular, I'm going to go ahead and collapse our larger view, and I want to filter down by our high risks. Now, this list is currently ordered by number, but you can sort it by a lot of different things. So I want to sort by risk score. So up at the top, that's that riskiest risk. I just like saying that. I apologize. But we can add any additional filter to kind of focus us in. Now, in a particular project, you could have 20, 30 different risks in that high segment. Now, there could be a set of them that aren't important until phase two. Well, because of the ability to create a categorization that's specific to risks, you can tag those, you can filter them out, you can pare them back. It might be specific by location. You might have just a prioritization level that you're tagging your risks to as well. For example, here, I just want to dive into our highest risk. And this kind of list is something that we would operate on once a week in the start of those kind of communication segments. So we can leverage the ability to save this as a report and bring it forward every week or just have it in that reports list for folks to come back and access. But if you haven't seen a risk, this is what it looks like inside a join. So name at the top, we can have that ROM, due date, assignee, very similar to items in terms of nature, but what we're talking through is kind of that response plan. Okay, we've captured what the scope of that risk is underneath the description, but for this particular lead times on electrical gear, what is it that we're doing to mitigate this? Now, for some of those mitigations, it's just going to be an action plan and then it comes into effect, weather being the example. But for others, where we're trying to secure early packages on electrical gear or just get a decision on it so we can get that early lead time kind of mitigated and purchased and rolling, then it can roll from an identified risk into a related item. And you can start that linkage from kind of it's not a silo, but from the page of a risk and the idea of a risk into, okay, let's see that cost impact laid back against our project. Okay, what's the delta? And Patrick, we were talking about it just last week, especially with electrical gear. A day can cost you more than $1.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
if you wouldn't mind kind of talking through that. Yeah.
Yeah. We were budgeting a project back in 24 and, the electrical gear that the budget that we carried was, let's say $750,000. So 750,000. And we got updated quotes this past month and it jumped to 7.5 million just because of the supply and demand scenario. So, that's where a risk register is a great tool to tie things into because we're looking forward now on other projects saying, okay, how do we make sure that, we're identifying this and keeping it in front of, that owner, that design team to say, hey, the sooner we make a decision on this, the sooner we get that ball rolling, the better off we are. And to tie it back to, one thing that you can do in your timeline is to say, okay, we need a final decision and put a milestone in your timeline on 11/1 for making that decision and even pull it, 2 weeks back so that you have the time to make sure that the design team signs off. It's all signed off so that by 11/1, when it needs to be released, it's ready to go.
I like that. If I could just kind of touch on that mechanically inside a join, there are two different dates that you can have associated with an item. One is going to be the association of the event on that timeline, and the other is the due date. So you can have it associated with the event on that timeline, kind of grouped for that overall list, but backtrack it 2 weeks for that due date so you can highlight, hey, is this going past due? It'll color into that red on that compressed line up above and start that communication and facilitate that back and forth.
Yeah.
And just to further hit that home, the earlier you track this as a risk and the earlier that it's mitigated or taken care of, you're, potentially purchasing the electrical gear that is 10 times less in cost because you've looked so far ahead and you've planned so far ahead that there's enough time to procure that electrical gear that's not going to come for a year. And that's a normal cost, right? Instead of accidentally not knowing the urgency of that decision, waiting until an additional 6 months and then having to buy that electrical gear that's 10 times the cost because we need to make sure that the lead time is much shorter now.
Right. And even if you have to pay, a small premium to stage it or store it off site, in a controlled environment, you're still money ahead than buying a unit that, you have to, again, pay for that rush delivery or, go to a different unit that's actually available that may be more expensive. So it's the identification and it's the pre-planning.
Yep.
I think we
So
might have
Garrett,
to. Oh, I was just gonna say we might have to coin a new phrase. You got to spend money to save money. That's a construction math.
it's true.
So,
Garrett, I was gonna say, let's if you could show us how to actually create the item from here, and then, I mean, I think what a lot of people might be curious about too is, hey, it works the other way too. So a risk can turn into a decision, and then on the other hand, unfortunately, some decisions give rise to risks. So if you could show us the opposite too, that would be cool.
oh, definitely. So I'll call your attention kind of bottom middle of this screen on the right hand side. I've already related a few different risks inside of this particular item just to show that you can have multiple linked. There might be staged decisions, there might be impacts. If there's a new item that you need to generate from that risk, you can launch it. Add new item on the right hand side. I will kind of call attention to the differences between this and just generating an item. It's going to pre-fill out some of the information and it pulls from that risk. So the name can be associated, direct link. It'll pull in that description. It'll assume the assignee filled out inside of that risk, all the way down into filling out some of those categorizations that are both applicable to risk and the items. So with this, we can create and publish, and it's going to automatically have that link inside of what we're seeing here. So that lead times on electrical gear. And then as that status changes, we now have that potential cost impact reflected on the cost trend line. We can see that in the accepted total values and running total values. And you can see that impact on the project as soon as it's been kind of initiated. Now to dovetail, just for the sake of time, I'm sorry, I've been heavy on my words thus far. If we hop into items, I want to show that reverse process. So if we're talking about upgrading lighting fixture packages, that has a whole lot of risk associated with it kind of in general because procurement of lighting packages has been something that I've seen more and more can become an issue. So if we go ahead and accept that as, yep, we're going to make that change, but now we're going to be talking about, hey, there's a time impact. We have to get this beforehand or it's going to cause us to push our handover dates. So you can generate that risk. Similarly, it's going to pull that information from the item and kind of backfill. So due dates, assignees, etc. Some of the differences are going to be inside of that risk profile. You're going to have to set that risk score. So with the impact and likelihood, both on 1 to 5, so that's going to calculate for your overall risk score, but it will carry through those categorizations that are applicable on both ends. And then once you generate, you're going to have that association right here. So the ability to kind of pop back and forth. Sometimes it's the risk first, item second. Sometimes it's the item first, risk second. So you have full flexibility going back and forth.
I just think, Garrett, what you're showing there too, I think what immediately comes to mind is the fact that having that be part of an item and vice versa. I think it would have made me a stronger pre-con manager in general, just to like be able to see, okay, there's a risk section to this item, and like I used to work a lot in renovation, so being able to understand, okay, like we want to salvage the brick. We don't want to have to order a bunch of new brick if we don't need to. That seems like an obvious thing to do, right? We're going to save $100,000 to reuse brick that's already sitting there. But then to be reminded, okay, wait, there's a risk associated with that. Like, what if it's not aesthetically pleasing? The architect doesn't like it. What if it's not structurally sound? Maybe we can't use that brick. So we need to have a plan B, or we need to at least surface the risk that sits behind a decision that seems like low-hanging fruit, but like might not actually be. So just constantly being or consistently being reminded that there is more to a decision than just the cost or just what meets the eye. There's other things that sit behind it, and they're all connected and in one platform.
Definitely. I think it plays into, Patrick, what you were saying. Visuals help significantly and associations help significantly. You get to kind of connect the dots of things that might have been disassociated beforehand. Looking from one Word doc to one Excel spreadsheet, you can draw lines, but to be able to single click and see that associated, oh, let's look at the item that's associated with this. Okay, we're seeing the item. Well, on top of that, let's tag it to that activity that we're talking about. Okay, there's going to be maybe a last responsible moment, or I'm tagging it to an OAC meeting 4. All of a sudden, we're bouncing on the 3 different vertices of that triangle of, hey, there's a cost impact, there's risk, there's schedule. Let's talk about
Yep.
the whole situation. You can have the whole package in terms of kind of conceptualized impact there.
Right. Right. And, you're bringing, you know, the total impact to the project forefront, which is crucial. You know, you're like you said, Garrett, you're showing the money, you're showing the schedule and what the overall risk is. And those 3 things, tying back to the poll questions, right? Earlier, this is what solves a lot of that information gap, so to speak. And helps to drive those decisions that need to get made, in a much quicker way than what we've previously seen.
Definitely.
All right. So, Garrett and Patrick, I think if there's nothing else to say about this, we might be able to move on to the Q&A portion of the webinar here. We have about 12 minutes left, so I think it might be an appropriate time to jump into that. While we're transitioning over, feel free to send in the questions that you guys may have in that Q&A functionality. I think I saw some come through already. Okay, 2, yep. Specialized. So Garrett, what is this bike that you ride? A specialized Rubai?
Specialized group A. So yeah, I was messaging with Kyle last night. Told him I just got back from a bike ride, so he wanted to know what I was rocking on the road.
Okay.
That's another joke referring back to the ice cream analogy from before, rocking on the road.
And then the other question that came through too, JD asked, can we easily update a group of items to add an activity, to add to an activity? And as Shay answered there, yes, we can. I think this relates to the bulk editor functionality that we released or are releasing this week, and being able to immediately add those items to a related activity. So I feel like JD's kind of predicting exactly what we were building out this week right there.
I often say he reads from the playbook. He knows what the process is.
Mm-hmm. All right. Any other questions? Keep them coming, guys.
So I see one here from Daniel Millard, and it's how would you handle an opportunity? So, uh, especially the kind of, well, I'm going to read the whole thing because he says it better than me. Some projects, especially lean IPD, have risk and opportunity registers. So that risk register that we're looking at is a little bit more focused on identified risk. When we're talking risk and opportunity, we're seeing that function more often than not inside of the items with the categorization tag. So you can tag, hey, this is going to increase, this is going to decrease, being able to kind of pivot back and forth and create those 2 separate logs of, hey, these are the opportunities, these are the risks, and then communicate them forward with those 2 saved as reports to be able to schedule that distribution or schedule that communication with it. So the functionality of that lean IPD risk and opportunity is slightly different than identified risks within the project, but both being fully able to function there.
And having used join on IPD projects before, the items tab is a great place to really leverage, your opportunities. And that's what makes that chart on the front end so great, that it shows that variable for it. So
So we've got another question here, but it's geared specifically to you, Patrick. So putting you on the hot seat. This one's coming from Kyle. So Patrick, of the 84 projects you've done and joined, how many of them have been meh, aka a fail? I'm reading it directly. So Kyle, I'm trying to get your voice here. What tips would you give to help make a successful project and join?
It's getting the buy-in early, and working with your design partners, your owners, and your own team to understand how to really leverage this tool. And that's what it is it's a tool that's here to make everybody's job easier, better, and really streamline the process, right? So, you know, um, the meh projects, I don't know. I mean, every project has its meh moments. It's just a matter of how do you take what those meh moments give you and leverage it on the next one, right? So I wouldn't say that any of them have been, bad, so to speak. It's just been different. And again, we're running projects from 300,000 to $3+ billion through this system. So you can do it. Anybody can do it. It's just you get the buy-in and you know leverage the tool the way it's designed to be used. It's going to save you a lot of time and a lot of energy in the big scheme of things.
Beautiful, beautiful.
All right, what else do we got here? Anything else? Let's see. All right, I'm gonna see this one. Let's see. I'm gonna answer. All right, so what is this one? Is there a quick way to add risk numbers, impact, or likelihood, and then jump to the next risk without having to back out of the risk register overall? So that's something that we've heard from our customers. I think you might be referencing what you could do in an item, and how you can kind of edit an item and then move to the next one. So we've heard that, and that's definitely something that we're going to be working on. Risk register is a relatively new feature, so that's definitely something that we're looking into to just make the experience a little bit more seamless. So that's a really good question, and I'm definitely going to pass that along, or we can pass that along to the product team.
So I'll take one here that I just saw coming from Kevin. Can you show risks on the trend line, or do they have to be items? So you can toss in a ROM inside of that risk, but it's not going to populate on the trend line until it's associated with an item with that item cost. And that's to kind of set up the process of potential change being identified as opposed to potential change within a project and kind of separating those two. So you can identify that risk of weather, to Patrick's example there of, hey, there could be a 100-year storm, and we know at least a ballpark of what that cost is going to be, but we don't want to represent that on the cost trend line until it becomes something that's a little bit more real. And then you'll generate the item, have that cost reflect against that cost trend line there.
All right, let's do one more. Let's see. Oh, Garrett, I think you might be good at answering this one, but I think I know the quick answer anyway. Is there a way to update? Is there a way to update the item markups template under items and have it change all items that were previously created? Yeah, so we did create that default markup template not too long ago, I believe a couple months ago. And once you do that in your active milestone, or in your milestone, and you'd like to retroactively apply those markups to already existing items, if you bulk move them to that milestone, then they will be auto updated per that markup structure. Is that accurate, Garrett? I hope I didn't misspeak there.
So I just saw the one. It's from CJ. Just to call you out there, CJ. Hey, this might be a little bit further conversation because it depends on what we're talking about. Are we talking about the item markup structure or the inherited milestone markups? Now we do have control of that inherited milestone markups for both selection on what is calculating for that S1, S2 subtotaling, and also whether it's a yes or no for inheriting to items. That one you can set that template and retroactively apply. That's what you're talking through, Ben.
Yep.
Hey, let's reapply those inherited milestone markups with that new template that we've generated. If you're talking about the independent item markup structure from the settings page and having that retroactively apply against existing items, that one's a no. That one's still going to be manual item by item, but it will work for every new item moving forward, just to make sure that we don't erase or override any kind of bespoke item markups that might be existing inside of those items already. So depending on what part you're looking at, CJ, yes for the inherited milestone markup section, no for the item markup section. And if you have more questions, that could be one that we follow up on a little bit more detailed on call.
Yep. All right, thanks for that, Garrett. Sorry for stepping on your toes there a little bit. But with
No,
that
I
being
dig it.
said, I think we should only about 2 minutes left here, so I do want to move forward. Just two more slides here. So what's next? So obviously we've been talking to you guys about connecting cost, risk, and schedule on your projects for the last hour here. So what would we challenge you guys to do? The first thing is import that first schedule of yours. I know that it may seem scary to do that kind of thing, but it's really not. You guys, it's not going to override anything you have on an existing project. If you need to re-upload, you could very easily do that. You could delete out anything that you don't want to have. But if you're not comfortable doing it on an existing project, you could always do it to a test project. But either way, definitely get that import in for your first schedule to just see how easy it is to jumpstart that timeline process. And then secondly, connecting an item to a risk. That's obviously a very important part to really connecting all of the different vertices of these triangles. So just understanding, hey, I'm creating this item and this arises or gives way to a risk, and then vice versa. That risk might turn into an item. So start connecting those. Even if you don't create something from an item or a risk, you could at least relate them. And then, as always, if you guys have any questions, if you want to do a deeper dive on anything we've talked about here today, or really anything else, please feel free to email support@join.build, or you can contact your account manager, your customer success rep, whoever. We love to hear from you guys, whether it be for a deeper dive or feedback, whatever it might be. But aside from that, I want to thank you guys for attending this webinar. We were really excited to show you all the different improvements that we had here on these different features. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you all, and special thanks to Patrick. Appreciate you guys.
Yeah. Thank you guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Patrick. All right. Bye, everybody.